Mi gente, you already know who it is. It's Danny Limelight. And I need all of you to subscribe to According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and all other platforms.
What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to a wrestling impresario, a referee du jour. He is the one, the only, Erik Melikian. Erik, what's going on, my brother?
Hey, Adam, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing great, man. It's so cool to have you on because I'm actually starting to put your face to XPW's Cold Day in Hell, and I'm just like, might be marking out at the moment, but that's fine, man.
Hey, I'm very honored. I'm very, very honored. I mean, this is my first podcast, by the way, so.
A first of many, I feel, because the stories that we were even kind of talking about off air, I am just like absolutely enthralled, and I can't wait to hear it. But, I mean, before we get into, like, I guess it would be topical in the sense that unfortunately, New Jack, Jerome Young, just recently passed away. But I mean, there's a lot of like recency in it, you know, with the names and what have you. But how did like pro wrestling find you?
You know what? I grew up as a fan. I started watching in the very late 80s, you know, during the Hulkamania era. So, I mean, without Hulk Hogan, I don't think along with possibly you, I don't want to speak on your half, but you and many other people from that era probably wouldn't be wrestling fans today.
No, that's facts. That's facts. But I actually, not to you have my pinky up, but the first wrestling or combat sports, anything that I've done, because like I'm like MMA, combat, pro wrestling, whatever guy. So the first combat sports, anything that I ever saw was Bret Hart versus Randy Savage, '87. On Saturday night's main event, and I was 2, right? So to me, I was just like, yeah, Warrior Hogan was cool and everything. That was the first pay-per-view that we bought as a family, but like, to me, Hart and Savage, whatever they were doing at any given time or wherever they were at, I was all in.
Hold on one second. Let me just turn on the light here. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you? I mean, did you grow up here in LA?
Yeah, I've grown up all my life in LA, actually. So, you know, as a kid, my dad used to take me to the LA Sports Arena, you know, and the WWF would come to town every 2 to 3 months. So it was a big deal.
Yeah,
it was a big deal.
Did you catch any of the LaBelle, the Grand Olympic Auditorium days, or had that already kind of?
But when we get into how I got into the business and who broke me in, there's a connection there. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes, I'm sure.
Hell yes, hell yes. So, I mean, were you a Hulkamaniac?
I definitely was a Hulkamaniac. I was a stinger. I was every stereotypical, I guess what you would call a wrestling mark as a little kid. I loved all the guys, the Ultimate Warrior, all those guys.
Wow. And now, you know, you talked about the LA Sports Arena, which, you know, in terms of like wrestling, right, and venues here in LA, you know, the Sports Arena is one of them, the Forum is one of them, Grand Olympic is definitely one of them. But you were there, you know, in some of the glory days. I mean, when your dad took you, was it more like house show, or did you get like to see the Mania? What was it, Mania 2?
I did go to Wrestlemania 7, but it was, for the most part, usually house shows. It was very bare bones, gritty. I guess looking back, gritty, but back then being, you know, a 6-7-year-old kid, it was like the greatest thing on earth.
Yeah. So talk to me about, like, because obviously, you know, we've heard of the arduous, you know, kind of hellacious, you know, road schedule of the 80s work, right? So and sometimes, you know, on house show loops, you know, people and wrestlers can be a little bit more freeing with their character and might portray things that they wouldn't necessarily do on TV character wise. So, do you have any fond memories of watching house shows at that time?
Boy, you know what? The only person I ever saw kind of broke character, on a house show would probably be Repo Man. Of all
Really?
people, Repo Man. He wasn't doing the gimmick. He wasn't doing the sly little walk or anything. He looked like, looking back, I mean, at the time you kind of wonder what's going on, but he looked like maybe he had a rough night the night before. So he was just kind of going in cruise control would be the best way to describe it, at least from what I remember.
Damn. And not to say, Barry Darso, the man behind the Repo Man, wasn't a great performer. Obviously, one half of like the Russian contingent, an NWA tag team champion with Ivan Koloff, ended up becoming, one of the members of the of Demolition, my goodness, and ended up becoming the Black Top Bully later down the line in WCW. But maybe he was just like, man, I just get shitty gimmicks. That maybe it was that night that he came to the realization, almost a la Cody Rhodes with Stardust.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but to me, I love Demolition. Demolition's one of my favorite all-time tag teams. Like, me and Klaus talk about this all the time. Like, it's just like, they're absolutely, if we had to pick between Road Warriors and Demolition, I'm definitely a Demolition guy.
Yeah, oh my gosh. And the theme song, he's the axe, he's the smasher, walking disaster. And you were somebody that got to experience it live, right? So obviously it's talked to death, and for a good reason, the Road Warrior pop. Anybody that gets this like out of this world type of pop, it's referred to as the Road Warrior pop. But Demolition in their heyday, I mean, that was a hell of a pop, right?
It was definitely, they were huge. They were, a lot of people that watched the WWF. I mean, I didn't watch NWA, WCW until about 1990. So to me, that's all I knew. People want to say that Demolition's a knockoff, and, I guess it's a matter of opinion. But to me, they were the tag team in every single way. And still to this day, it holds up. Like, some things just hold up to the test of time, and they definitely do.
Yeah, man. Of course, Darso was great, and then I believe it was Moondog Rex was one of Randy Colley was the original Demolition, member, but like, God, Bill Eadie, that dude, fucking amazing performer, that one.
Yeah, and I think he was kind of in the twilight of his career even at that point. He was kind of on the tail end, and it's amazing. I think that, the Masked Superstar was huge, but I think Axe kind of took it to another level for him. Yeah.
No, 1,000%. I guess the adage of there's levels to this shit, that was a level. Masked Superstar, Georgia, awesome. But we're talking like worldwide. I think there was a Demolition match, like, somewhere in France or whatever, and they had this like kind of weird deal, but I was just like, and they were even getting the pop there, and I don't think him as Masked Superstar would have got that pop in France. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, kind of it was more of a regional thing back then. But even back then, just it was larger than life, and people, one way or another, even if you went to Georgia, or because he worked in New York too, for the old WWF, I mean, you couldn't tell those people differently, and that's all that matters at the end of the day.
No, 1,000%. Now, Tiltbrook over on YouTube, he says he's bringing up your refereeing career. He says, I remember seeing you referee in Oceanside, California. What was the angle you worked with Bob Caden where he attacked you from the crowd with a 7-Up can? Rocco in the Woods.
Oh, Bob Caden, interesting guy. I've met Bob through Chris Kloss. Chris has known him for many, many, many years, stemming back to his childhood, and he has actually a deep-seated roots in this business. He used to, I think, help coordinate venues, for some outlaw federations in the Northeast back in the 70s, and I think he might have had a slight connection to the old Worldwide Wrestling Federation as well for a time. He knew Chief Jay Strongbow and a few other of those guys from that era.
Damn, that's man, that's amazing. And there apparently
He's
there's
someone
aspects.
you might want to interview one day as well.
Oh, I'm totally down. I mean, he's still with us.
He's still with us. He's a great guy. Like, he's got a lot of stories. He's actually shared a knowledge with me. Even though things were a lot more kayfabe back then, he did pick up quite a few things. And he was also, we'll talk about it later, kind of instrumental in my career as well.
I love it. Now, Patriotism USA says, what is your toughest match to ref?
Boy, that's a tough. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of these fatal four-ways, these three-way matches, and these matches that just anything that doesn't have psychology and nothing where I can't feed off whoever I'm in the ring with. It's always a challenge and presents so many issues that unless you're in that spot, it's really hard to put into words.
I love it. I love it. And I love that you mentioned, like, XPW great, Chris Kloss. He's somebody that I have modeled. I mean, theoretically, and I had a conversation with Kloss and George Hermosa of this. If not for Chris Kloss, I mean, especially if you're doing anything here on a mic here in LA and being, centered around wrestling, he's a major kind of like reason why we're all here.
Yeah, very much so. Chris Kloss, and you're talking about Chris, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Kloss has been. We'll talk about it later, but it's been another person who's been very instrumental in my career. That I can't thank him enough for so much he's done for me.
No, man, he's amazing. Now, we put the horse in front of the wagon a bit because we talked about the matches and refs and whatever, but like we didn't talk about the transition, because like I've never taken a bump, I've never stepped through the ropes as an active competitor. I love it, but also I'm like, oh damn. But you went beyond just your fandom and were like, I want to get into the business. How did that happen?
Okay, I don't know if you remember back in the day when High Spots first started, they had this old school message board, and it was one of those, unless you were around in the 96, 97 range, I can't really describe it to people, but they'd have posts and you'd have to type a description of what the subject's about, and then there'd be this big storybook paragraph with whatever info was about. And little did I know, because back in the day I collected a lot of wrestling magazines, anything from Pro Wrestling Illustrated to the WWF magazine to the old WCW magazine, Wrestling World, so many other things. And in Wrestling World, they covered a local promotion in Maywood, California called the AIWA.
Wow.
And they were probably about the only thing around at that time. Even guys like Jesse Hernandez weren't promoting at the time, but a guy named Alex Knight and Ed Aarons were promoting, I believe it was every 6 to 8 weeks in Maywood. I could be wrong, and I'm sorry, Alex. I'm sorry, Ed, if I'm getting that wrong. But they promoted big shows at the Maywood Baseball Park, and they draw many hundreds of people at times. Even the old, the infamous Dr. Jerry Graham wrestled there a few times as well.
What?
Yeah.
Oh man, when you talk about for those that don't know, this is the man who Vincent Kennedy McMahon, the current Vince McMahon that we know now, he wanted to be, from almost the jump of, because he grew up in one of the Carolinas, in a trailer park, didn't know his dad, didn't have too much of a relationship when his dad comes into the picture. And then he is a wrestling promoter. Second generation was Vincent J. McMahon, right? And, Vince Jr., Vincent Kennedy, wants to be like Dr. Jerry Graham. Even further, one of the wildest stories, not just in wrestling, but just humans, where his mother passed away. Do you know the story?
Vince's mother or Dr.
No. Dr. Jerry Graham.
Yes, I've heard this story, and Alex actually told me the whole story himself. It's very fascinating.
Give me Alex's version, because I don't think I could do that justice.
Well, basically, his mother had passed away. I believe it was in Phoenix, Arizona, or outside of Phoenix, Arizona, and he drove into the hospital in his Pete Cadillac. All the security guards, hospital personnel tried to hold him back, but he was, for better or worse, probably a few sheets under the wind, and took his mother out of the morgue. Carried her over his shoulder. I forgot if it was his right or left shoulder. Took her in his car and drove off. And there was a high speed chase I heard on the highway with him and police. And I heard, and I don't know 100% if this is fact or not, but I heard he was committed for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's not hyperbole. There's an article of, like, I can't remember what the Arizona local paper was, but it's there. It's totally there.
It's crazy. I've heard so many stories about the guy, and it's kind of, I feel bad for him for the fact that he was for a long time so close to Vince. And I know from what I understand, he was very hurt during the expansion that Vince never brought him in for anything. But I'm guessing there was another side to the story, and who knows what the deal was with that.
Yeah, and especially, now we know more about, traumatic brain injury and what have you. We're on the other side of the horrible Benoit tragedies, and not to lead to any speculation, but as hard as I mean, wrestling was more shoot than it was sports entertainment in those days. So it could be he probably already had a prior, like, mental state of mind, and then entered the wrestling business because that's where wrestling draws is crazy folk and what have you, and carnies and whatever, and fit right in. Or it was something maybe that was undiagnosed that he went to in the ring, and what have you. We just never know. But yeah, it is a tragic story regardless of how you cut it.
But you know what? I don't want this to turn into something where we talk unfondly of the guy in any way, but if you've seen any of his matches, the guy was a great storyteller, and the guy could talk. I mean, that's something either you have or you don't, and that's what I think has become very much a lost art nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Could you imagine putting a script in front of Dr. Jerry Graham?
No, not at all.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's just,
Maybe a lot of the guys we grew up watching, I don't think they'd be able to do it, or would want to do it.
No.
And I think it would have turned out differently as well.
No, 100%. Now, you mentioned the AIWA, which, even with the SoCal kind of seed, right? When we've got, the
Yeah.
PWGs, PCW Ultras, and a litany of other promotions, and unfortunately, the AIWA gets lost. The Grand Olympic, for a certain generation gets lost. So was that through those ranks is how you kind of came into the business?
Well, going back to the High Spot story, it listed for, if you wanted ring rentals, it gave Alex Knight's either cell phone or house phone number. I forget now, because this was like in '97. It gave his phone number, and if you wanted any info on the wrestling shows, it gave a 323 number. Actually, no, back then it was a 213 number. I called it up, and I talked to Alex, and would probably hound him for 2 or 3 years straight. I'd call him at least once a month and bug him. He finally invited me to a wrestling show that the recently late Rick Drayson promoted in Burbank back in 1999. Did at one of the high schools for a charity event, and Alex wrestled on the show. First time I ever saw an independent show. There were, guys that I met that had helped me on later on, like a guy named Rick Sadist, the Ballard brothers. I met them there, Mr. Outrageous, Al Burke, and a few others. And from there, I joined his ring crew, paid my dues, and he took me in the ring a few times and showed me the ropes. And that was quite of an interesting experience in itself.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Now, did you have at that moment, like, did you have any intentions of being an in-ring performer, or was it just doing the thing that you saw all of your heroes doing?
It's one of those things. A lot of people want to be a wrestler, but then when they do it and they take a bump, it's a lot tougher than people think. It really, truly is. And I know there's a lot of people that have training out there, and it's brutal. It's like boot camp style training. Alex was old school to the T because he grew up during the territory era. He grew up with actually the Guerrero family in El Paso. Yeah. So he, broke into the business, and, guys like Gory Guerrero gave him his break. So he worked shows. I think it was every Monday night over at some bullfighting rink somewhere in El Paso where they did shows, and he cut his teeth there in Juarez, Mexico. And then from there, he came out to LA, worked the Grand Olympic Auditorium in the 70s. And then in the 80s, he did, I don't know if you've heard of the old California Championship Wrestling, where he was one of the medics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, like the take on this Memphis tag team, right? The Medics.
It's very similar, yeah, because I think at one point Tom Ernesto was a booker for California
That makes sense. Yeah, who was the original Medic? Yeah. Wow.
So I was graciously broken in by a guy who didn't have to give a teenager the time of day. I don't want to say at first he fully kind of let me in on how everything worked, but he was, I got to say, one of the nicest guys. He's old school as they come and as legit as they come. And as Al Snow told me once, because I've worked with him a couple times, and I told him who broke me in, and he goes, well, you were broken in by somebody legit in this business. And he says, remember, everything you do from the moment you start in this business to the moment you stop doing this, he's responsible for you, and you're his boy. So remember that every time you do something, every time you go out in that ring, and everything you do and how you conduct yourself.
Wow, man. And, just a glimmer of that, you could already imagine what the guys and girls of this current roster of OVW, right? Ohio Valley Wrestling, is taking, because he's taking up the reins, bought it from Nightmare Danny Davis, and owning and operating that whole deal.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Because I've worked with Al, and Al's just a barrel of information. I learned so much just working with him a couple different times, and kind of wish someone like him was kind of at the PC nowadays. I wish, it's kind of mind-boggling to me why he's not over there, at least in my humble opinion.
100%. And it's funny, just a nice little bit of trivia, but much like Shayna Baszler, Jessamine Duke, Marina Shafir, Ronda Rousey, and Brock Lesnar, Al Snow is one of the only people out of a handful of people that are both in the WWE network as well as UFC Fight Pass, because he was a cornerman for none other than Dan the Beast Severn in his dalliances in the first dalliances in the UFC.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Bumps and bruises happened a couple of years ago, here in LA, and it was actually Al Snow and Hardcore Holly were there, and I was doing, I was being the mean gene and what have you. I go up to Snow, and Snow could have been nicer. I was scared to talk to Holly, all the stories that you'd heard, all the stories in his book and everything. Couldn't have been sweeter. Just sweetheart of folks. But that was the first thing I asked Snow. I was like, what was it like being in that early UFC? We talked about 15 minutes about that and from his deal. And, Seven was wrestling at the time. He was a NWA champion at the time, when it didn't really mean much, right? Like, you had names like Mike Rapata, the Colorado Kid, as former champions, right? So it was just cool to kind of get his take on the whole deal.
Yeah, no, Al, from what I understand, and Al's very humble, and what I've learned, especially in this business, the toughest guys are the ones that don't go out of their way to show it. You either see it when something goes down and they have to show it, or you would never know it. But I've heard from multiple people, Al's one of the tougher guys in this business and knows how to shoot and handle his own any day of the week.
No, 100%. Ghost Heads Talk Pass. They saying it's Joe the Panther Jr. 10 points for Joe the Panther Jr. because if we're talking about like old school wrestling, Joe Panther Jr. of the Dudes at Ringside podcast, I believe his grandfather wrestled in the old WWF at the Garden.
Wow, really? Mm-hmm. Did he give you any info who his grandfather was?
Yes. Well, it's because he's Joe Panther Jr., so I'm going to assume that it's Joe Panther, something of that ilk. But I guess a nice little plug. But this guy will be on the Dudes at Ringside podcast this Friday, so I'm definitely going to ask. So that might be a cool deal to jump on YouTube and Twitch on the Dudes at Ringside podcast to ask him.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to research this guy too. I'm kind of curious.
Oh yeah, I'll send you all the deets. Joe and the Metal Geek are such great guys. Can't wait to jump on their podcast. So it's going to be a fun time. Now, you came into the business with somebody that didn't come in at a fun time. That could have been an intimidating thing for you as a teenager that just loved it, ring crew member. But I mean, that theoretically speaking, that's the way that the business had been run since the Carney days, right? You basically break people in. The reason why they call it breaking in is because they wanted to break you out of the business. They wanted you to never do this again, right? And if you came back, then, we hear the story of Hulk Hogan and Hiro Matsuda broke his leg the first day out, and he came back, and they're like, okay, we'll teach you some shit, right? So, in basically coming in the old school way, again, were you like, I want to wrestle?
You know what I realized, and I'm a pretty realist person when it comes to this. Something that's lacking today too, and no offense to anybody that does this, there's so many great athletes and things that are mind-boggling, but I think you have to be realistic. I think you have to have a certain size, a certain look. You have to have a certain it factor, like Bruce Pritchard always talks about on his podcast. It's something that I think a lot of people want to live their dream, and I think that's great. But at the same time, you need to kind of be real at the time. And, with the physicality and everything else, you got to kind of find your place.
No, 100%. And that's not a bad thing to like realize. Like, it's cool. I'm one of those guys too. I'm like, I want to be a pro wrestler. My dad is, African descendant of slaves from the Midwest. My mom is from Fiji. Like the same genealogy almost is The Rock. The Rock, right? And I'm like, I'm going to be a giant. And I'm going to go wrestle in Japan until my knees blow out and whatever. And then come back and find myself in some commentary spot somewhere in North America. Well, genetics are a motherfucker, because like 5'9" is all I got. I must have got the recessive trait and whatever, but I figured, no, I'll do jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I'm pretty crappy at that. So that also tells me where I am in terms of trying to shoot fight and whatever. So I leave it to the actual professional wrestlers. But I love that you mentioned, they're great athletes. You could be a great athlete and not a storyteller. Unfortunately, we see it almost on a week-to-week basis that amazing moves mean absolutely nothing. Nothing.
And that's a big thing. And unfortunately, when I broke in, I think I started reffing late 2003, 2004. I kind of came at the end of the old school transitioning to what we're seeing on a mainstream level now. And let's just say it kind of made my job as a referee and what I was trying to learn and what I was taught a lot more difficult. Yeah,
no, I could only imagine, and When you're talking of that early 2000s, man, you're a youngin', right? This is probably right after high school. So, what did your folks have to say about like, oh, Eric's joining wrestling?
My dad was always very, very, very supportive. He actually knows Alex. He's met Ed too. He came to my first few shows, so he's always been very supportive of me in every way. So, while it's probably not something they'd envision me doing, they're nothing but supportive about it.
Shout out to Moms and Pops. That's a great story because, like, most people, like, both pro wrestling and MMA, like, my parents hated it and whatever, and I had to prove them wrong and what have you. That wasn't the case with you.
Not really. I mean, it wasn't my dad's favorite thing. Still to this day, when I talk to him, he'll be like, oh, remember when I took you to all those wrestling shows at the Sports Arena or the WCW shows at the Great Western Forum? Like he still mentions that, but he goes, hey, it's what you liked and what you were passionate about, so he had no problem doing it.
Oh, man. I'm going to Mario Yamasaki, your dad. That's just great. That's amazing. Now, your first match, how did that come about? Your first show that you worked, did you ref one match? Did you do a whole card? What was the case?
I was setting up a ring for Alex. They were doing a street fair show over in Montebello. And I met a guy named, I don't know if you're familiar with the local guy named Fabian Fury.
Yes.
He was trained by Jesse Hernandez and Bobby Bradley at School of Hard Knocks. And I met him. He came to the show. I'm trying to remember, it was so long ago. I don't know if he ended up getting a spot on the show, or I think he might have trained with Alex for a little bit too, but he had a friend, Johnny, who trained at the XPW Asylum, and he decided to put some shows together for Hybrid Pro Wrestling. That's how Hybrid Pro Wrestling formed, and I was on their first show. And that's how I cut my teeth, yeah.
Oh, my PWI after Mags, IQ is going absolutely, like, you're setting off so many bells because, like, I would read about this, like, and I was too young to actually go at shows and, raised around Inglewood. Like, my parents weren't too keen on, me going out and whatever, especially during the time period of the late 90s, early 2000s LA, right? So, but I would live vicariously through the aftermags, through the PWIs and the arena reports. And I know all of these promotions, and I know all of these names. And I love that you're bringing them up because, unfortunately, a certain generation, they're just like, oh, Rick Knox, Young Bucks, and there's nothing before it.
No, there's a lot more. There's a guy named Patrick Hernandez, if anyone's, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but probably the best, in my humble opinion, the best referee and one of the best human beings I've ever met in this business to come out of Southern California.
Which, I mean, was that one of your kind of influences early on?
He was a huge mentor. I was very green, probably first year or two I was in the business, but I met him. I knew him from the XPW days. I'm sure you're familiar with him. Patrick broke in through Dynamite D and Slammers back in, I believe, the mid-90s. Yeah, Dynamite D is another guy who's been very influential and helped me a lot when I started. Actually, the first match I ever refereed was a tag match, and Dynamite D was in the match, and he helped me so much. Probably, I learned through him. He made my job so much easier than years later other guys have. He was just such the consummate professional.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit. I've had the opportunity and pleasure of, interviewing and having on the podcast a lot of the, the alumni from Santino's, and they're just like, that's one thing that Joey did is like he instilled a little bit of like they knew Dynamite D because of Joey and Sylvia Munoz. So.
I'll be honest, I have no comment about that when it comes to that.
I like it. Oh, for a long pause, I was like, we hit a nerve.
I just said I was going to be truthful. Yeah. I told you I'd be truthful, so.
No, 100%. No, that's great. So, obviously, from that that show in roughing for Dynamite D, in that tag match, to where a lot of people know you from is, XPW's relaunch and of Cold Day in Hell. There was a long kind of iteration. So how long? And the reason why I want to get this because obviously, like 2020 was like a hellacious year for everyone, right? And people are trying to figure out what to do and figuring out the process is to win in their life, not just in their career, but their life, right? So it takes a lifetime to become an overnight success. So how long did it take you from that first initial match that you refed to XPW Cold Day and Hay?
I would say it was a good 4.5 years, maybe a little longer. So right around that range. But yeah, 4.5 years would be a good estimate. Cut my teeth working many different types of shows. I worked some great shows, some shows that no one knows about, and I worked with some great guys, like the Ballard Brothers, Rick Sadis, Jason Redondo, Dynamite D, Supreme. The list goes on and on. I've worked, to me, I always appreciated working with the old school guys, the guys that got it, the guys that were truly, is Mike Chioda. I got to meet him, who was another inspiration for me. I met him a couple times, and when I talked to him, he referred to himself as a worker. And I would say right around that time to maybe a year or two later, I understood exactly what he meant by when he said that.
That's amazing. Yeah, one of the all-time greats is Mike Chioda. And it's funny because, like, at a time where you were kind of patrioting, the product, the WWF product, as a fan of that early 90s time period, Chioda's rocking a hell of a mullet. Hell of a mullet.
Yeah, he was. He was. It was interesting to see the evolution over the years of Mike Chioda.
Yeah, man. Everybody says, like, Shawn Michaels' canary mullet, that's something to behold, but you gotta give it to Chioda, man.
Yeah, Jimmy Hart had a killer mullet too at one time.
Yeah, he did. It still does. It's thinning, but it's like beans and taters, man. That's why you get the glow of your skin. He's like 80 something. He's like 80. He looks not a day over dead. But the way you do it is he's a vegetarian and he's all about the beans and the taters.
And I met him one time too, and boy, what a great ambassador for this business. That guy still to this day is paying his dues. I can truly say, if anybody needs to get their ego in check, just watch Jimmy Hart. I saw him at a Wrestle reunion. I think it was back in 2011 or 12.
I was there.
He was helping. You were there. Did you see him kind of running around helping everybody? And
him and Apter, which is the weirdest fucking thing. Like, yeah. Wonderful Willie Apter in the mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart, like just plugging everything. Go over here, Iron Sheik's over here, Superstar Billy Graham's over there. Like it was wild, so wild.
I saw Jimmy Hart like a chicken with his head cut off, running around the hotel, grabbing extra chairs. I mean, doing everything as possible. So anybody who breaks into this business or thinking about breaking into this business and you don't want to pay your dues, look at nobody further than Jimmy Hart. And you know what? If it's still something you don't want to do, then maybe you need to think twice that maybe, it's time to find another line of work or consider doing something else.
No, 100%. I love that you said that. Because, Jimmy gets kind of, I don't want to say nobody really says anything badly of him. I just think with everything that's happened with Hogan, I think a lot of times you kind of just group him in, Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of forgotten more than anything.
Yeah. Especially, when you've got like the Heymans and, like all of these amazing managers and, we saw Paul Bear, we saw Bobby Heenan, right? Where, if Jim Cornette, absolutely. But if you have a top 10 manager and Jimmy Hart isn't in your top 10, you need to reevaluate your list is what I'm saying.
I agree. I totally agree.
The Hart Foundation. Good God.
Heart Foundation, Earthquake. I mean, Dino Bravo, so many guys. He managed Hogan. You know, people want to knock when Hogan first came into WCW, but he was in the top spot as a babyface manager, which was kind of unheard of.
Yeah, and then flipped the switch and went over with the Dungeon of Doom and Kevin Sullivan.
Yeah.
Oh man, him and the Faces of Fear. Like, just give me that every day, twice on Sundays. It's that. Just Ming and Haku just Ming and Barb just beating the ever living tar out of everyone, and Jimmy Hart just running around the ring with the megaphone.
And I've met both of those guys, Haku and Barbarian, and especially Haku's a great guy. Barbarian is another, like, on the list. If you have a top 10 of the nicest guys, Barbarian's definitely on that list as well. But two of the toughest dudes you'd ever meet.
Oh, Haku's stories are endless. I mean, you know, the Haku and Andre just let Haku just do his thing, and like he literally cleared a room.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? And it's funny, me and Klaus actually drove Haku back to LAX after a show I worked one time, and started asking him about these stories, and totally kayfabe the whole thing, totally acted like, oh, it wasn't a big deal, or it never happened. Like, he's totally just a humble, just laid back, nice guy.
That's funny. Oh my gosh. That's hilarious, because, you know, nowadays you'd like post that on Instagram and whatever, and, you know, be a hashtag and whatever. But no, he's just like literally one of the baddest hombres to ever step foot in the ring. You know, started off as a sumo, you know, and he's just, whatever.
Yeah, whatever, just downplays it and, you know, changes the subject. And you know what? Usually the real tough guys I found out in this business tend to do that. They don't need to talk about how tough they are or show it. If it ends up you have to see it, it's unfortunate for whoever caused it. That's how I look at it.
No, 100%. Oh man, you say that, and I just think of Ken Patera and Saito in Minneapolis. You know, the McDonald's, something like that.
Yeah, I've heard of that story. Yeah.
Oh yeah, again, it's not hyperbole. It, like the Minnesota Star or whatever. Like, they literally took out brick by brick, like demolished the damn fast food restaurant because they couldn't buy the damn hamburger meat that they were going to throw away anyway. So they're like, and somebody just said, fuck you to Ken Patera, Olympic weightlifter, all around badass. Yeah. And Saito, same in judo.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I'd rather play in traffic, like on the 405. I'd rather just run right through than have to deal with those two.
Your chances.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. It's the same boat.
So, as a pro wrestling fan, right? Like, you liked XPW, right? Like, you loved it.
I liked XPW. It kind of had its own flavor. It was different. It was similar to ECW, but it wasn't. It had more of that raunchy, to me, I'd say more of a Howard Stern flavor to it. And you had, like, you know, as a teenager, you know, you had the women, and, you know, they pushed a different type of envelope. I know Rob Black gets a lot of hate from people, but no one can deny that he was a great heel. Any way you slice it, he wanted people to dislike him, and he did it. People still talk about him to this day. There's all these urban legends and everything about him. So I think that guy created what he wanted to out of this business.
No, 1,000%, man. It's yeah, man. Can't knock him. You know, he brought something in an era where everybody's supposedly trying to be different, right? Like now, right? AEW wants to be different. New Japan wants to be different. ROH, they all want to be different. There was nothing quite like XPW.
No, there wasn't, and they had some gems there. They had some gems, but I think the biggest issue with them is they had a hard time focusing on storylines and keeping things kind of steady afloat. kind of just a continual thing because there was a lot of changes.
Yeah, unfortunately, the changes happened, but a pretty cool change, right? Because that was the kind of first initial run of XPW, but it gets resurrected in the mid 2000s, and you find yourself, like, as a referee on the comeback pay per view, the Cold Day in Hell. How did that happen?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I was friends with Chris Kloss. I mean, Chris Kloss is, I can name him, Patrick Hernandez, Alex Knight, a guy named Scott who wrestled as Scott Snot. He now is a manager, Jack Fancy for EWF and a few other promotions in Southern California. Jeff Dino and a couple other guys really, really had gone to bat for me over the years. And through the comeback Cold Day in Hell, I ended up meeting Mike Hartsfield. I don't know if you're familiar with Mike Hartsfield. Mm-hmm. Very instrumental in XPW Cold Day in Hell. To be quite honest with you, back in the day, even in XPW, I don't think a lot of things would have happened without Mike Hartsfield. Like, he's diehard XPW to the core. And again, this is a broken record, but one of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet. And I hit it off with him. He took a chance with me. And I ended up, I think, on that first show, I worked the D Battle Royal, and I worked with Pogo and Sandman on that show.
Jeez. You want to talk about hardcore and all that? What was that match like?
It was interesting. I actually was, I picked up Hack. I don't know if you ever met Sandman Hack. He's a very cool guy, very interesting guy. He's got a lot of interesting theories, and very smart, intelligent guy as well. I know a lot of people say that, that he is his gimmick, and he is his gimmick to a T, but he's a very intelligent, smart guy as well that runs a bunch of different businesses where he doesn't need professional wrestling. And, I think just talking to him and picking him up from the airport, for some reason we hit it off, and he made my job so much easier.
That's amazing. And a lot of people a lot of people in the know will say that he, Hack, Sandman, whatever way you want to slice it, he was the precursor to Stone Cold Steve Austin in terms of what could be presented, in a North American promotion.
Yeah, very much so. So working with him and Pogo, I mean, you know what? It went off well. I think it was one of those things. Organic is best in this business, and everything was organic.
Man, I love it. Which, do you have any interesting stories of that night? I think there's a lot to unpack, and I think George Hermosa, along with the great Chris Kloss, do a great job at Extreme Memories on the Wrestling Chatter Network, or Wrestling Chatter channel on YouTube, of kind of deciphering and unpacking a lot of the things that happened in XPW. But on your take, like, what was that night like?
It was interesting. It was nerve-wracking for me for a lot of reasons. We had over 1,000 people. I want to say close to 1,500 people there, down the street from where I grew up, and the whole setup, everything. It was a big deal, and a couple interesting things happened backstage. I don't want to bury anybody directly, but there was a guy whose friends, let's just say he's friends with Triple H, and he was fresh out of WWE rehab. He showed up to the show, and backstage it looked like he was worse for wear again.
Cold Day in Hell?
Yeah, Cold Day in Hell. And he went out and performed and everything was fine, but it was very obvious to me and some other people that maybe he shouldn't have been there 100%. And there was another guy, too, who was an ECW legend who let's just say, was also worse for wear and ended up having to substitute another no name in a tag match last second. Anybody who was there or who's seen the show or has a copy of the DVD, you can read between the lines who these people were.
Crazy time, right? Yeah. And obviously we were kind of mentioning about like the athletes of today's era of pro wrestling or sports entertainment, right? But like, I guess one of the good byproducts of there being so many athletes now versus like pro wrestlers, right? There aren't in terms of the sheer number of deaths that, befell our heroes, right? Like that is on a dramatic decline of the last 10 years versus the decade before it.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. But then again, kind of the specialty or the uniqueness of pro wrestling, it's just like those were even with all of those stories, like that's how you cope of, basically going on the road, 200 plus days out of the year, or like you got a chemical substance or you develop a, something, and it's just weird. Now everybody just kind of whips up, I don't know, like an Xbox or goes on their phone, right? And then, like stories, right? There's stories that's the way that you learned the business, through car rides and what have you with veteran talent. But you don't get that because everybody's in their own tour bus or, doing their own thing, which unfortunately that's kind of why we are here the way we are now.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate too. I mean, a lot of the old school guys I've talked to back in the day in the car rides, they didn't discuss about spots they did in a match. They talked about little things maybe they could have done differently to improve maybe the way they sold, maybe the way they presented something. Things that, another thing Al Snow told me, everyone's sole purpose in this business should be about trying to draw money. And if you're not trying to draw money, then you're really not serving your purpose.
No, 100%. That's it. One of the euphemisms that I miss being used, is, when Monsoon would talk about, they're going to the pay window. Like that, yeah. To me, it was like, oh, wins and losses matter, because if this guy or girl doesn't win, they're not going to be able to go to the pay window. Thus, they're behind on their bills. They can't feed their families. So that's why like wins and losses, they actually mattered. Championships, yeah. There was more zeros at the end of the paycheck than there would be if you weren't a champion. Like it had real stakes.
Hey, Adam, is it possible for like 60 seconds if I check something? Maybe you want to field questions and see if anybody's got any questions they want to ask when I come back?
Sure.
Is that possible?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So whilst Erik is there, I'm going to. Hey guys. If you guys don't already know, that is Erik Melikian. See, I said it great off air and then I flubbered it up, but Erik is a professional wrestling referee, or was a professional wrestling referee, and a lot of the work, it was here in the Southern California area. I say here because I'm here in Southern California, and a litany of stories. Don McGuire wants to know why a referee and not a wrestler. We actually covered it a little bit before, so you might want to check that out. But yeah, it was just paying dues, setting up the rings, and and then once you got in the ring, right? I don't want to paraphrase the story or tell it, but getting in the ring and seeing how tough it was, because you got to remember the culture of pro wrestling, right? They wanted you to not be a pro wrestler. Didn't want you to be a pro wrestler. They wanted to break your soul, your spirit, your body, right? So essentially, they would rough you up. And then if you, if you came back, then they actually would teach you how to wrestle, so that's it. It was more of a shoot fight than anything else. So, once you don't do that, that's why he became a referee. So there, we're back.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. No, you're fine. Man, that's so. And Don McGuire says, I'm in hog heaven with the stories. No, 100%. I'm a pro wrestling fan. That's it. You know, if not for pro wrestling, I wouldn't be into anything else, man. And I try. I try to be a normal human and try to watch a movie, Captain something or other, or Lord of the whatever the fuck, and 10 minutes in, I fall asleep. Like wrestling, MMA, like I'll watch UFC Embedded, I'll watch PFL, whatever they've got. I've watched all the documentaries and whatever on Amazon Network and everything like that. I'm in. I'm totally in. You give me anything else, I fucking don't know, man.
Are you still as much of a fan today as you were, say, 20, 30 years ago?
I'm a fan. I'm more disheartened of what the North American kind of like presentation of wrestling is. Or I don't care if we call it pro wrestling or sports entertainment. I'm disappointed that we're here. I don't want to see super kicks. I want to see one. I don't want to see DDTs. I want to see one. I don't want to see spine busters. I want to see one. That's it. Like spear. Like if it's not Goldberg, fuck you. Don't do the spear.
Yeah.
Because that guy, he was a football player, right? He fucking ran through you. He damn knocked himself out in a Saudi blood money show. Great. Like, that's it. So when I see like 125-pound dudes or gals doing it, I'm like, no, fuck it. No, we're done. We're done. I'm feeling a little bit more like Jim Cornette every day.
Yeah. Jim's great. I got to get, a lot of people knock Cornette, but he's true, genuine, and throughout the years, he's been very consistent in his beliefs and won't change for anybody. And you know what? I admire that. I think above all, he's a huge wrestling fan, just like me, you, and anybody else. When we were kids, he, in a way, to a small degree, still views it that way, and no one can fault him for that.
No, 100%. Which, if you had a favorite era or presentation of wrestling, you're now, whenever, live or watching it on tape, on TV, what have you. What is your favorite, era?
Definitely, I would say late 80s through the 90s. Absolutely, through the end of the Attitude Era.
Do you have a favorite WrestleMania?
Ooh. I would say 1 through 8 was pretty great consistently. I don't know if anyone can knock a single one.
Wait, you don't like 10? Oh.
10 was okay. 10 was okay, but I don't know. Something was lacking from it, in my opinion.
To me, that's my favorite. That's,
Really?
talk about consistent, and total disclosure, again, I'm a fucking heart mark, right? Like, my son, his name is Owen, right? So you've got Brett and Owen, right? First match of the night. And even from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, from Howard Finkel. And then they start playing Owen's fucking rocket music. And then you hear the fucking boos. Like, it was just, there's so much about that. It's amazing. And then you have the continuation of, obviously, Lex and Brett supposedly, allegedly, going over the Royal Rumble, over the top ropes and hitting the floor at the same time, even though that wasn't the case, even when they slowed it down, right? So you had that. You had the blow-off of that stipulation, right? Where, Brett and Lex went at it, and then Brett won and went on to do Yokozuna. And just even the end, right? You think about the last thing. Roddy Piper comes back to referee, and as unstoppable as Yokozuna was, and whatever, and then he fucking literally slips on a banana peel that was the second rope and wobbles the shit out of it. And that visual, I watched it back a couple weeks ago. That just the visual of a guy of his girth doing that, fuck, I didn't think that. I thought the damn ring would fall into Madison Square Garden. And then he fucking, it's just, to me, my favorite Mania. And then Owen coming out at the end and everybody, like Macho Man fucking, try to get him in the ring and everything like that. And he's just like, there's like a moment you're just like, maybe he's gonna join his brother, and then it's just like, you son of a, and it walks back, and it's just, to me, it's perfect, so perfect.
I think the only letdown at the time, and looking back, just because of the storyline, they were building up Lex for so long, and they kind of just, that was the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I wanted to ditch school for the Lex Express when it came to San Francisco. My dad wouldn't let me. He was like, "Your education's important." But now I bought a shit ton of Dogecoin. So, hi, Dad.
Yeah.
To the moon! To the moon! Oh man. Okay, so you say 1 through 8, right?
1 through 8. Yeah, you can't knock a single WrestleMania.
Okay. And I hate to say like your baby, because arguably one of the greatest time periods for the WWF, kind of the killing of the territories and all that stuff. There's a lot going into it. But if you were to pick your favorite Mania out of the 8, what say you?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I know most people would pick WrestleMania 3, but was for me, I'd say 6 or 7.
Okay. That's the tournament with Mach winning, and what was it?
WrestleMania 6 and 7 was Warrior and Hogan.
Okay,
and
that was 6, right?
Yeah, and then 7 was the biggest match on that card for me. Was the whole storyline with the Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man.
Yes. Yeah, I remember the fucking the VHS cover. That's where Warrior's all like, yeah, okay. I remember that. Yeah. Oh, poor Mach had to work with Warrior. Good God.
Well, hey, no one can knock Warrior. At least for the short time he was there, he made an impact. So
I don't know. He did quite enough on his YouTube channel, so there's that.
Well, yeah, there's that too.
Tilbrook wants to know. I know it never came into fruition, but Eric, can you elaborate on also on how you were possibly going to work the season 2 of Pro Wrestling Society X, or Wrestling Society X?
Very few people knew that. I was in talks with Chris Kloss, who was, of course, the lead play-by-play guy on the MTV show. Did a fantastic job. I don't know why he's not in WWE today or in AEW or any major company for that matter. But through him, I talking to him and Kevin Kleinrock, we were in talks about if there was a possible season 2 getting involved. I know. And to be completely honest, I know Kevin was kind of a little apprehensive because of my height, but was willing to give me a shot, at least to try out if there was a season 2. But unfortunately, it never happened.
How serious were the talks? Because we're kind of talking off air that you were in and around the Big Vision kind of circle, right? Big Vision Entertainment that produced Cold Day in Hell and Pro Wrestling Society X after its MTV run. And I won't even say, what was it, the Lucha show, right? That came a little bit after on MTV.
I wasn't involved in the Lucha show on MTV,
right.
but
the Big Vision was.
Yes, I believe they were for a minute. That was the one with Mark Jindrak, right?
Yep, Jindrak and a young Grand Metalik. That was the first time that he was actually on like North American TV, was through that show. Matt Hardy's wife, Rebby. That was all. Yeah, that was all there. Yeah, I know. I get geeky with my shit.
To answer your question, talks were pretty much that, it was solid that I was going to be, it was a little more than considered. I was definitely a tryout was in the works for sure. But anything else past that, it was kind of to be determined.
Yeah, rumor and innuendo, as Bruce Picture says.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Now, you kind of got my kind of take on pro wrestling nowadays, but if any, what pro wrestling organization or anything draws your interest right now?
To be honest, I don't watch too much. You can name a bunch of people from NXT, and not to discredit anybody, what they're doing. I know everyone works hard. But to me, you could put them in a lineup and I couldn't tell you who anybody is. WWE starting to become that way. AEW, I don't know 3/4 of the guys except for the ones I've worked with on the SoCal indie scene here. If you want to talk more about that, we could discuss that as well. And the only thing I do catch a glimpse of now again is what the NWA is doing. And I think, if anything, that's probably the most that grabs my attention. I think Nick Aldis is a perfect world champion. He's another guy I'm kind of puzzled by why he's not in WWE. I think Vince McMahon can do a million great things with him. I mean, the guy looks like straight out of a James Bond movie.
No, 1,000%. Which
he speaks, talks, and works like a world champion.
Yeah. I mean, a world champion where world champions actually meant something rather than have two on one fucking show.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too.
Yeah. You were talking about the SoCal scene. So, any interesting SoCal stories about? And again, you don't have to name the names, right? But who were you kind of around during your kind of dalliance in pro wrestling that is somewhere now?
Young Bucks for sure. I know Matt and Nick real well. It's been a long time since I've seen them, but always got along with them personally. I don't know if I necessarily agree with them professionally on a lot of ends, but that's neither here or there. Adam Pearce, who I hear now is an on-air TV character for WWE and is I'm hearing climbing up the executive board. I was around him a lot at SoCal Pro, and as far as Adam was at least back 10 years ago was a Jekyll and Hyde personality, very intense and at times very much a bully.
Wow.
If things didn't go his way, he'd put his hands on me physically in a ring. I think he's done a lot of unprofessional things down in Oceanside, California. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about that, but it's just interesting to see certain things that you see on TV nowadays, and you kind of look back and go, wow, interesting. That's the best way to put it.
No, 100%. Which, I know.
I mean, if you want a particular story, I got a couple particular stories if you want to talk about.
If you, whatever you're willing to dish, we're here for you.
I worked a Millennium Pro Wrestling show. I believe it was in Chatsworth. This was maybe around the 2010, 2011 era. He was NWA World Champion. If he wasn't, he was kind of in and out at that point, but he was always in the mix of having the belt. And I'm not going to say, to be fair here, Adam, when he was on his game and professional, a great worker and could be great to work with. But there were times that, and I've learned over the years, if you're working with someone who may not be quite at that elite level, the Dynamite D's that I mentioned earlier, the Al Snows, the Buff Bagwells, the Gangrels, so many guys I've worked with over the years know how to cover for that. He would flip out and do very unprofessional things. Well, he worked with this guy, this manager that I guess he never worked with before. I didn't referee the match, but I saw it from backstage, and I saw the whole incident come down. I guess the guy forgot, for better or worse, when Adam needed him, he wasn't there for whatever reason. And we could speculate, we could talk about what the reason was or wasn't. But after the match, all I remember is Adam taking a steel chair and bashing it over his own manager's head in front of a crowd. So to me, we could talk about, what someone thinks or doesn't think about somebody, but I was taught when I broke in the business that's the most unprofessional thing to do, especially when the audience has no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's pretty grimy. That's pretty grimy.
Sorry, Adam. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. And Tiltwork also wants to know: did Erik ever work with that guy, John Grabo?
John Grabo.
Oh, there you go.
Wow,
There's
this
another
led to John
pronunciation.
Grabo, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, this is a. You know what? If we do a part 2, we'll discuss John Grabo, my
Okay.
experience. Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
That I think that's it. The part 2 is what's gonna have to happen, and somebody might have kayfabed themselves in terms of who Tiltbrook actually is. I'm just saying. So there's
Who?
that. Tiltbrook.
Who?
Tiltbrook. Yeah,
I've
he might have
never heard
revealed
of.
himself. He might have revealed himself, and I'm not gonna break kayfabe here, but I think you and I both know who Tiltbrook is. But
Tealbrook. I've never heard of that. I wouldn't know anybody that would go by that.
yeah, but I will also say Chris Kloss is one of the greatest commentators of all time.
Yeah, Kloss is one of the best. He should be in a major company today, and the fact he isn't is kind of a travesty.
That's one of the reasons why wrestling or sports entertainment is where it's at right now, and that's nor here
Exactly.
nor there.
It's like you said, Gorilla Monsoon used to make wins and losses mean something.
Yep. Yeah, I know. Man, obviously, Eric, there have been a lot of people in your life and career that have helped you get to where you are. So take as long as you need. Let's get some shout outs out of the way, my man.
There's a lot of people I'd like to thank. Of course, Alex Knight, who's a, longtime journeyman in professional wrestling dating back to the mid 60s. He served, in Vietnam War. He was in the Navy, and he started wrestling as a teenager. He broke away to go serve in the military for us, and then from there he had a long career. I believe he had his last match in 2004, 2005, so he had quite a long career. Without him, I wouldn't be in this. So first and foremost, I have to thank him. He's trained a lot of people in this business. I know he trained, I don't know if you heard of the guy, Rod Price, who was former tag team partners with Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Trained him. He trained the Ballard brothers. He trained a guy named Ron Rivera, who was the American Wild Child, who kind of trained a lot of the PWG guys. And, without him, back in the 90s, I don't think there would have been a Southern California wrestling scene. So, of course, shout out to him. Ed Aarons, the promoter, the guy that he promoted shows with. Chris Kloss, when I met him, probably was it my first or second year? Without him, I don't think I would have gotten as far as I did. Great friend. We've got a lot of interesting stories outside of the business together, too. That's not on a wrestling podcast, by the way, but him, Patrick Hernandez, another guy, probably as far as Southern California. To me, a lot of people talk about Rick Knox, but Patrick Hernandez will always be the epitome of what I think a referee should be. And someone who had WWE experience as well. So hopefully someday he'll come out of retirement, and I'd love to see him get his Wrestlemania moment, because I'm not going to find a nicer, more knowledgeable guy that deserves it. Another guy, Mike Hartsfield. I talked about Mike briefly earlier. He was a guy who took a chance with me at Cold Day in Hell and on the XPW relaunch, made me a pivotal part of everything. I helped with booking for a bit, just, odds and ends, different things. And Mike is an awesome guy. So, Mike, I haven't talked to you in a while, but if you're listening to this, thank you so much for everything. Jeff Dino over at SoCal Pro in Oceanside, a guy who took a chance with me as well and made me his head referee. And I've worked, with him, I had so many great opportunities, with the NWA and just, with any other big name he'd bring in. I was the guy that, would work the big matches over there. Always a straight shooter, always honest. He was one of the few promoters that never broke a promise with me. Even if going into something, it may have not been worth my time, he'd let me know beforehand. But, I consider Jeff a friend to this day. I haven't talked to him in a while, but he's someone that I haven't refereed in a while, but if he needed somebody in a heartbeat, I'd come down to Oceanside and work for him. Let's see, who else? Dynamite D, the late Dynamite D. What can I say? Seems like there's a lot of guys now in this business that don't have to have mainstream exposure in order to have an influence in this business. And I'd like to think if he was still alive today, D would be either at the Performance Center as a producer for WWE or in some major company having a major hand backstage, because he's just a guy who got it, as Bruce Pritchard would say. And there's so many other people I can thank off the top of my head. I've worked with guys like Gangrel, Al Snow, guy named Gary Key who wrestled as Tool in XPW, another great guy who gave me so many opportunities. List goes on and on. Sorry if I'm leaving anybody out. Oh, another referee, Ryan Moreno, who up until recently was working for EWF. I think he was a definite shoo-in. I know WWE was looking at him, and I think probably one of the top referees to come out of SoCal in a long time. So I hope he gets his day one day as well.
Man, I love it. I love it. And again, we got to do a part 2. So, I mean, got to leave the audience wanting more. But if people want to get in contact with you, like, what's the best place to do so, good sir?
I'm not on social media at all. I kind of steer clear of all that. I kind of kayfabe all that. So I guess the best way to contact me is they can contact you and they get, hold of me through you, or, if anyone knows Chris Kloss, probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Yeah, I would love to be your what are they, policeman, right? You're the you're the Luthez at Strangler Lewis, and Kloss and I will be your policeman. Hell yeah!
Exactly. We'll just do it that way. Yeah, I mean, I guess that'd be the best way to reach me. I'm not on social media or anything, so I really don't have anything to plug. It was just an honor, Adam, to have me on the show and share some of my experiences and thoughts, and it's great talking with a fellow wrestling fan that grew up in the same era.
There you go, George Hermosa, our friend. He said, Chris Kloss, that's great. I was a pleasure to have you on. I can't thank you enough for doing this. You're somebody that I watched, kind of in my iterations of watching wrestling, and just thank you for being you and following your dreams. And and Hermosa says, "Yep, got to go through Chris Kloss to book Erik." No, those are absolute facts, But also, thank you guys for joining us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. I mean, Erik, you're subscribed to the podcast, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. Actually, when you sent me the link yesterday, the first thing I did was subscribe to it. So I'm going to be watching. When's your next podcast, by the way? Give you a plug here.
Could be in the next couple of minutes. We just never know.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to have to keep my notification on here.
Hell yes, do that. Be like Erik and turn the notification bell on so you can see what in the world I'll be doing next, right? And I'm ready for round 2 to break previous interview records. Yes, and George Hermosa has the record of having a 5+ hour interview here on the According to Woods channel. So
it defeats the Chris Kloss record of over 4
hours. It does, right? It does. Yeah, no, 100%. And that was kind of his intention. So there you go.
There you go. That's something to strive for. I guess I got to shoot for 6 hours.
There you go. I mean, that's it. I'm gonna pack my Wheaties. My goodness. But again, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. You guys are amazing. Erik, you're amazing. And we will see you later.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it.
Make sure you subscribe to